Welcome back to the Imperfectionist Podcast. My name is David Rendall, and I'm excited for a special March Madness edition of the podcast. I got to thinking about this recently. I was speaking for a big contractor for Verizon and talking to them about leadership development and taking a different approach to developing people. And I'd been thinking about sports, but let's talk about March Madness first, because it's March Madness time. When this comes out, you'll know who's in the Final Four. Two of them were decided last night. Two more will be decided today. And one of the defining features of March Madness, the NCAA men's and women's Division I basketball tournament, is how unpredictable it is. That teams that are ranked really low and are unlikely to win end up winning, and that teams that are ranked really high and seem likely to win and everybody predicts them to win end up losing. And that's perfect for what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to talk about how people are unpredictable. And specifically, we're not good at, we are bad at, and I mean everyone, even the people, and this is the March Madness lesson, even the people who you think would be good at it, or the people who seem like they would be good at it, or the people who tell you that they definitely know because they're some kind of expert, we are all bad at predicting how people are going to turn out. Just like we're bad at predicting who's going to win the NCAA men's and women's basketball tournament, March Madness. And every year we end up surprised by who wins and who loses and who makes it and who doesn't. And yet every year, the next year, people act like they know more than you do, when in fact, someone picking teams based on their favorite animals or their favorite colors or the places where their friends live or where they grew up are just as likely to be successful as somebody who spends 24/7 predicting basketball. And a great example of how we're terrible at predicting how things are going to turn out is how many marriages end in divorce, for example. When you get to married to somebody, you're predicting that they're awesome. They're predicting that you're awesome and that you're going to continue to get more awesome and that your life together is going to become more and more awesome. And then you end up divorced with restraining orders in place, because we aren't good at, even when the stakes are really high, predicting who's good and who's bad, who's right and who's wrong, who's going to turn out well, who's going to turn out poorly, or even who's good for us, even though we are the expert on us. So today's going to have kind of a sports theme, and that's going to be popular and unpopular. So that talk that I did for the Verizon contractor, after I was done, I added this section that I'm going to talk about in the podcast today to the talk, and it's all kind of sports related, because that's where the stakes are the highest in predicting who's going to succeed and who's not. When a teacher tells a student, you're never going to make it, we don't really hear those stories. But when a team cuts a player and another team picks them up and the person ends up becoming an all-star or an MVP or takes them to a championship, we all find out about it. And yet it shows the same process and the same problem happening over and over again. It's just that we don't find out about it most of the time when the teacher or the parent or the adult makes that prediction about somebody. And we do hear about it when the sports team does it. But also, the stakes are a lot higher. A teacher really has no stake in predicting that you're going to be a loser or you're going to be a winner. But a pro football team, a basketball team, a baseball team has millions and millions of dollars at stake and would seem to have all of the incentives. And so then they make all of the efforts to try to figure out, how do we predict who's going to win and who's going to lose, who's going to do well and who's going to do poorly. And here's the crucial part. And then they're still terrible at it. So here's what I want to ask you. If you're like, no, I'm good at predicting how people are going to turn out and who's going to make it and who isn't, and who the good employees are and who the bad employees are, and I have a sixth sense in knowing how my kids are going to turn out, for example, or if this behavior is going to turn out to be adaptive or maladaptive or be an advantage or a disadvantage. Ask yourself, do you put as much time, energy, and effort into it as sports teams do, professional sports teams? The answer is no. And yet they still do it terribly, despite all the energy and effort and money that they put into it. So why would you be able to do it any better? Now, we'll get to the point about why I'm saying this. And well, you will know why I'm saying this, because this is the Imperfectionist Podcast, and we think we're good at predicting. And so we think we can look at people's characteristics and tell you who's going to turn out well and who's going to turn out poorly. And I'm showing you that we can't. And so my whole point for today is be more open about whether some characteristics that you probably don't like or have been taught aren't good. Be more open about how those characteristics might actually lead to success, and at least be humble enough to know that they do, even if you can't understand how or why. And don't be as quick to predict. Most of the problems we have with our children, with our spouses, with our employees, and even with ourselves isn't really what's happening right now. It's my kid is doing this and I'm worried that's going to cause them to struggle in school, struggle in college, not get a good job, not be able to be successful. We're predicting down the road. If you keep doing this, things aren't going to work out for you. In the future, if you keep moving in this direction, you're going to have to change, right? That's the whole thing. You're going to have to change. Whereas the Imperfectionist Podcast says, no, flaunt it, be unashamed and unapologetic. Find the upside of those weaknesses, find the advantage that goes with the disadvantage. Don't change who you are, change where you are, and find situations that match the unique defining features that you have. So we're going to have a little bit of a sports theme today, and that's going to be unpopular and popular, just like it was at my presentation for the Verizon contractor. Because when I finished, person in charge, the chief people officer for this organization, said, wow, that was really good. And like I said, I added this all to a presentation that I've done for you. I added a whole 30-minute, maybe 40-minute section on this because I thought it would be really helpful, because one of their main goals was how to develop people better and finding different ways to develop people better. And the person who had the most influence in the whole room, potentially, or at least the most organizational power in the whole room, when I finished, said, wow, that was really good. I loved that whole section on sports. I could have listened to that all day. I just love that. I love that stuff. Boom. I crushed it. And then I got the evaluations back and I crushed it, like 4.9 out of 5. Everybody gave me a 5 except one person. And the one negative comment was, I wasn't a big fan of, and that's a funny way to put it, I wasn't a big fan of the section on sports. Kind of lost me a little bit. That's not my favorite thing to talk about. And I am kind of aware of that, and I try to not, because I'm a big sports fan, but I know everybody isn't, I try not to use sports as an easy analogy or a lazy analogy and end up losing people who aren't sports fans. But I did two things during the presentation. Number one, I recognized that, and I wasn't doing it a lazy reason. I was doing it on purpose, because what I just told you, sports have the highest stakes for who they pick. And there's the most to win and the most to lose financially and organizationally based on your ability to do it well, or the way that you end up doing it poorly. And so I hoped that people could understand this. I wasn't talking about how to score touchdowns or how to hit more home runs. I was talking about how to manage people and using a case study from an organization. Anyway, there are a lot of reasons that I think it was a valuable thing to do. But one person absolutely loved it. One person absolutely hated it. And that's the way things are always going to be. And so I wasn't like, oh, I shouldn't have done it. I was just like, yeah, you can't get everybody. And I'm glad I did it. And I think it was a valuable thing to do. But it isn't going to be. It's going to seem imperfect. Someone's going to say that's not for me. And they did kind of say it that way, which I thought was nice. But they were also kind of saying, I wish he wouldn't have done that, or maybe he shouldn't have done that. You're not going to win everybody. And that's, from last week, that's a pink goldfish message. You're going to antagonize some people. You're going to repel some people. And I did. I repelled one person and I attracted another person dramatically. And I won most of the people, which again, I think is an important thing as well, is are you winning in general? Or if you're losing everybody, and you're repelling everybody, then maybe you're on the wrong track with the specific imperfection that you chose or the specific strategy that you chose. So we're going to have a sports theme. So if that's not your thing, if you don't even know what I'm talking about when I say March Madness, if you don't care about sports, you can shut it off now. However, I would tell you that you don't have to know anything about sports to follow this, and that hopefully if you care about getting better, helping other people get better, if it's part of your job to help people get better, if you care about raising better kids, this is going to be a valuable episode. And again, the theme is unpredictable. So that's my question for you to start off the episode is, how good do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being terrible and 10 being amazing? How good are you at predicting how people are going to turn out, right? I'm humble about this. I know that I'm bad at it. I won't share some of the examples because they would be negative towards people that I've worked with in the past and that have been in my life. But I mean, I've literally, there's somebody who, if you would ask me who's somebody you'd have as a business partner, I would have picked this person. And then they ended up going to prison for embezzling from an organization that we worked for together. I thought they were the best and they were kind of the worst, and they ended up mistreating their family and mistreating the charity that we worked for. I couldn't have done a worse job of predicting who was going to fail and who was going to succeed, who was good and who was bad. And so I've seen this in my own life too. This isn't me commenting on other people. I'm not good at this. And like I said, I don't think anybody is good at this. And when we think we are, we're making a mistake. So we're going to focus on sports. And there's a whole series of reasons for this. One is, like I said, March Madness and how unpredictable the March Madness tournament is. And that's sort of famous and what makes it so exciting, which is another thing, the imperfection of it, the imperfection of the predictions. And everybody does their brackets every year and they pick it and they try to win money in an office pool or with their friends. And every year, no one has a perfect bracket, right? And they love to track how quickly everybody ends up making a mistake and how there's no perfect brackets left. And I think there's something like a $1 billion prize if you could get a perfect bracket, because it's impossible to predict what's going to happen. And again, you might say, well, those are sports teams. But what are sports teams? They're a group of people with talents, and you're predicting who has the people with the best talents that have the best likelihood of succeeding. And looking at their past performance and their future potential, you're predicting the outcomes of people's performance. And that's essentially what we're doing in schools when we say who the good students are and who the bad students are, when we say who the good employees are and the bad employees are, who the good kids are and who the bad kids are. And that's a good non-sports example that I just thought of is valedictorians. They've done some studies recently and discovered that valedictorians, and I think I've mentioned this before, do fine in life. They certainly don't end up doing poorly on average, especially. But valedictorians don't end up the most famous and successful and wealthy and happy people in the world. Success at school does not predict life success. And what that also means is if the most successful people at school don't end up being the most successful people in the rest of life or in business or in relationships or whatever, then that means that the seemingly less successful kids in school, or maybe even the dropouts, are somehow becoming the most successful, happy, and well-adjusted people in the world, which means that we failed again to predict and to even prepare people for how to be successful in real life. So we said, hey, look at you, you're the best. And it turns out that person turned out not to be the best. We were predicting that you're going to make it because school is a good predictor of and a preparation for success in real life. And that turns out not to be as true. And again, not down on the valedictorians. Valedictorians do fine, but they don't end up having the highest levels of success, which means that other people are, and we didn't predict those people's success because we're not good at predicting who's going to make it and who isn't. So the reason this has a sports theme in addition to March Madness is because I was at another event for a company called Technology Marketing Toolkit, where I'm an MC and they're expert in residence on professional speaking and presentations and communications. And Billy Bean was one of the speakers at that event, and he is the subject of the book and the movie Moneyball by Michael Lewis. I just realized, it says it really small on the ball. I was like, where does it say Moneyball? So he's the subject of a very successful book by Michael Lewis called Moneyball, which was then turned into a movie starring Brad Pitt, which isn't a bad person to play you in a movie. And the main premise of Moneyball was that baseball teams were bad at predicting who was going to be a good player and who was going to be a bad player. And they were bad for a couple of reasons. And we talked about this a little bit on a previous podcast, but I just want to do it as an intro here because it's what got me on this train of thought. They basically, former baseball players were scouts, which were the people who sought out the talent for the teams. And they basically looked for people that looked like them and looked like baseball players, whatever that means, tall, muscular, and athletic. And they ruled out the people who were not tall, muscular, and athletic. And Moneyball is a story about a team who said, wait, I don't think we're good at predicting this. And if we could be better at predicting it, if we could be more accurate, we could be successful when we don't have very much money for our team, the Oakland Athletics at the time, which turned out not to be a successful team at all in the long run financially, and now have moved to Las Vegas because Oakland just couldn't support them. But they ended up having some success and ended up changing the way the entire game of baseball is played and managed by identifying people who were going to be successful in baseball even when other people thought they weren't going to be successful in baseball and in fact thought they would be unsuccessful in baseball. And also by avoiding hiring and paying large amounts of money to people who looked like they were going to be successful in baseball but weren't going to be successful in baseball. And they did that primarily based on statistics. And I won't get into that. And so that was kind of the situation, the experience, the circumstances that got me thinking about this. Why are we so bad at this even when we're being paid to do it well? And why are we so confident? I mean, these people who were predicting it wrong just they were completely unwilling to change, completely unwilling to acknowledge that they needed to do it differently, which is why Moneyball is such an interesting movie and why it was such an interesting book. And I encourage you to check that out, Moneyball by Michael Lewis. So that got me thinking about how bad we are at this in general. And then the football season, which I love football and I love the Green Bay Packers. And they've let me down a lot lately, just like my Wisconsin Badgers let me down in March Madness. But I was following football, and some really, really interesting stuff happened in football over the last year where people just did an especially outrageously bad job of picking who was going to do well and who was going to do poorly. So before we jump into that, I'm getting a little bit thirsty, and I'm excited about a new sticker that I have, Liquid Death, Murder Your Thirst, on my pink travel mug that my daughter got for me. So that's special. Perfect spot to put that sticker. And I got that sticker when I bought some Liquid Death stuff that I'm going to show you on a future episode. But to be clear, we are, as you know, if you follow the podcast, not sponsored by Liquid Death Mountain Water. Delicious and refreshing. So they're bad at it in baseball. One team got better at it and then changed baseball. The Chicago Cubs started doing it like the Oakland A's, and they won a World Series for the first time in 108 years. The Boston Red Sox started doing it like the Oakland Athletics did it, and they ended up winning the World Series. And breaking this decades-long curse that they'd experienced and have gone on to tremendous success. And now it's just conventional wisdom in baseball that there's a better way to predict who will succeed. And now there's a broader range of people. In baseball, there's fatter players than you ever would have had before. There's shorter, and this is a big one, shorter players than you ever would have had in baseball before, and skinnier, thinner, weaker, less muscular players than you ever would have had before in baseball, and players with different kinds of skills that are valued, like getting a walk, getting on base, not just hitting home runs, less of the sexy sort of dramatic skills, but that are valuable for winning games. And so March Madness got me thinking about that. Moneyball and being there on stage with Billy Beane got me thinking about that. And what really got me thinking about that, though, as I went to that presentation where I added this section, was the NFL season. So a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, the New York Giants, who are not very good at football, but have won a couple of a couple of Super Bowls, but lately are historically bad. They had a great running back from Penn State named Saquon Barkley, and he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. And his contract was up, and it was time to either pay him a lot of money for being very good or let him go, trade him to some other team. And the management of the New York Giants, which again is being paid and rewarded based on their ability to identify who's valuable and who's not valuable, and who's good and who's bad, said, running backs don't matter that much, and Saquon isn't that valuable to our team, and so we will just go ahead and get rid of him. And meanwhile, they had a quarterback named Daniel Jones, and they predicted that Daniel Jones was going to be a very good quarterback and was going to help their team win. And so they paid Daniel Jones something like $30 million and were unwilling to pay Saquon Barkley something like $12 million because they predicted that Daniel Jones was going to be very, very successful in football for them and make them very successful as a team, and that Saquon Barkley wasn't going to. And then if you follow football at all, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you what happened. Saquon Barkley ended up going to the Philadelphia Eagles and ended up setting the record for the second most rushing yards in a season, had a tremendous amount of touchdowns, led them to the Super Bowl, had an epic year as an individual performer, and had an epic year as a team player and led his team to the biggest success that you can have in pro football. And so the New York Giants were wrong about Saquon Barkley. The Philadelphia Eagles were right about Saquon Barkley. But Saquon Barkley isn't the whole story here, because Daniel Jones wasn't just not good or the best or worth $30 million. He was so bad that they cut him from the team in the middle of the year, and he got picked up by the Minnesota Vikings. So by the end of the year, the person that they thought would be the best and that they paid $30 million to was playing for another team. And the person that they refused to pay 1/3 that amount was also playing for another team and ended up beating them twice that year and ended up helping his team win the Super Bowl. That's bad. Right? You don't have to care about sports to know that they did a terrible job picking who was going to be good. They picked wrong. And who wasn't going to be good, they picked wrong. The person they thought would be bad ended up good. The person they thought would be good ended up bad, right? Forget sports. That's not good. And we do this in life all the time. And here's the other problem with that. Sometimes it ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. Self-fulfilling prophecy means that you predict something's going to be true and then you act in a way that makes it true. A simple example happens in relationships all the time. You decide, oh, you know what? I don't think my spouse loves me anymore. And so then you decide if they don't love you, you're not going to act loving towards them, because why would you act loving towards somebody who doesn't love you? So you start ignoring them. You stop communicating with them. You start mistreating them. You stop doing nice things to help them and support them and encourage them. And then over time, the person says, hey, I don't love you anymore. And you're like, hey, I knew it. It's like, no, you didn't know it. You predicted it, and then you actually caused it to happen. And we can do this especially with our children and especially with our employees, because if you predict an employee is going to be a failure, and you stop supporting them and stop encouraging them and start looking for the negative in them. When you stop encouraging your kids, stop supporting them, start looking for the negative in them, start seeing them as little criminals, start seeing them as dishonest or lazy or as looking to take advantage of things or being spoiled or whatever it is, being entitled, whatever you think is wrong with them. Once you start developing that mindset and you start treating that person that way, you start getting a lot of times exactly what you expect. And then you go, see, I'm a good predictor of how people are going to turn out. And in sports, when a team says, we don't think this quarterback is going to be very good, sometimes they don't give him a chance to play and they just sit him on the bench and they don't trade him. And so then they never get to play. And then they don't end up being very good because they never got a chance to be very good because they didn't have the right coach or they didn't have the right system or they didn't have the right situation. And we definitely saw that in the NFL this year because players who were bad quarterbacks on other teams ended up being amazing quarterbacks on their new teams because they had the right coach, the right team, the right situation. Our predictions are powerful because they oftentimes cause exactly what we're predicting. And so that's another reason to be careful when predicting failure with people, but also when predicting failure specifically, because sometimes we end up causing the failure of the person or the relationship because we predicted it and then started acting in a way that led us in that very same direction. So the Giants did a terrible job of predicting who was going to do it well and who was going to do it poorly. And the Philadelphia Eagles ended up going 14-3 and winning the Super Bowl, and the New York Giants ended up going 3-14. So they didn't just do a bad job picking the quarterback, a bad job letting go of the greatest running back apparently in the NFL in the last 40 years since Eric Dickerson when I was a kid. They had a terrible year. They had terrible results. They did very poorly as a team, right? And they weren't the only one. In the NFL in general, and this oftentimes happens, we develop this kind of groupthink in our industry. Last week, Stan and I talked about pink goldfish. And one of the reasons it's hard to be different in organizations is because we work in industries where everybody starts to think that the same things make you successful and the same things make you a failure and the same things lead to good business and the same things lead to bad business. And we all start to measure ourselves in the same way. So we all start to look the same way and we all start to act the same way. And then a competitor comes along who goes against everything that we believed in and ends up having tremendous success. And so one of the things that happened in the NFL was everybody started believing that running backs didn't matter. So it wasn't just Saquon Barkley doesn't matter. It's running backs. The position doesn't matter. The game has changed. Just like in NBA basketball, the three-point shot and outside shooting has become more important. And the tall guys on the inside, the centers and the post-up game have become less and less important. And so teams, but it's also become a self-fulfilling prophecy because then other teams focus on three-pointers and then other teams focus on three-pointers and then they don't focus on big guys. And I do think there will be a point at which it turns around because a team's going to have success by saying, wait a second, what if we went against this and found ways to take advantage of the fact that everybody else is playing this different sort of game? And so the Giants weren't the only ones that did this. There was a running back called Josh Jacobs who played for the Oakland Raiders, which then became the Las Vegas Raiders. You see a pattern here of Oakland teams going to Las Vegas, if you've been paying attention. And he was the NFL rushing leader in the past, where he was the best running back for the NFL over the entire year. And the Raiders decided we don't need Josh Jacobs. He's not that valuable specifically, and he's not going to keep doing this well. And running backs aren't important either. So they traded him to the Green Bay Packers. Go Packers. And what happened? The Las Vegas Raiders went 4-13. Which is just as bad as the Giants were. So these teams were like, we got it figured out. We're going to play the game the way it's supposed to be played, and we've got the right way, and we're going to do it better than these other people. Ended up doing it the worst. And what did Josh Jacobs do for the Packers? He was one of the top 5 running backs in the entire NFL last year. So another mistake about the person and even the way to play the game. And you'll see this over and over. And that's why pink goldfish is just an outgrowth of the freak factor. Weaknesses are also strengths. Things that look bad are also good. things that look like disadvantages are also advantages for people, but also then we need to also translate that into the way we run our organizations. And sometimes we look around and we copy what all the other businesses are doing, and we end up being undifferentiated, and so people don't choose us. I'm leaving in a few minutes, actually, as soon as I'm done with this podcast, to go to Junction City, Kansas, to speak to the community there about how they can be different in their community and apply pink goldfish principles in their community. And then I'm going to Granbury, Texas, to do the same thing, to talk about how small communities and rural communities can stand out and be different in a world that seems to value big cities and suburbs and stuff like that. And so this is incredibly important and incredibly valuable to do at both levels. And so these teams aren't just making talent mistakes with their employees, they're making organizational strategy mistakes, and those things go together. So Las Vegas ends up doing terribly, but they're not the only ones making this mistake. Derrick Henry has been one of the best running backs in the NFL for years. He was one of the best running backs in the NCAA before that with Alabama, and is just one of those people that even if you don't like his team, you'll watch his highlights because he runs people over and just sort of dominates. And so he played for the Tennessee Titans. And again, they decided they didn't need him, and it wasn't going to be a good investment. Let's think about it this way. It wasn't going to be a good investment. Look at the prediction and the way that turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy. It wasn't going to be a good investment to pay him the money, right? So they predicted who's going to be successful, and then am I going to get my return on investment? Just like you buying a lottery ticket or you investing in a stock or in a mutual fund. I'm going to put my money here because I think it's going to turn around and benefit me. They said it's not worth investing in Derrick Henry because it's not going to pay off. And so they traded him to the Baltimore Ravens, who thought it was worth paying him and that he would be valuable. And then the Tennessee Titans ended up worse than the Las Vegas Raiders or the New York Giants. They ended up going 3-14. They won 3 games, lost 14 games, and were the absolute worst in their division. And Baltimore, who picked up, and you'll see the trend there, Baltimore, who picked up Derrick Henry, ended up going 12-5 and going to the playoffs because they ended up having one of the best teams in football because they got one of the best players in football and proved that the running back position was valuable, and they ended up paying somebody to do something that other people said wasn't even really worth it, and you didn't even really need anybody other than just a decent. And man, what a mistake we make in an organization we do this, right? I don't need great employees. I don't need extraordinary employees. I just need okay employees. Anybody can do this, or anybody can do this well. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we make in organizations. So let's look at the running back results from 2024. Saquon Barkley had the most rushing yards for the year 2005. Derrick Henry had 1,921 yards, the second most. And Josh Jacobs, I said it wrong earlier when I said he was in the top 5, was 6th with 1,329. So those 3 players that literally the NFL decided as a group, we're not going to pay these people, and no other teams were interested in picking them up until the Packers, the Ravens, and Philadelphia kind of broke away from the rest of the NFL and said, we're going to do this. And those guys ended up being 3 of the top 6 and 2 of the top 2 running backs in the NFL, and led their teams to success as well. So it wasn't just were they going to do well or were they going to do poorly. The other question is there going to be return on investment? And the answer was yes. And the teams who failed to make the investment did terribly, not just poorly, not just average. They did terribly. They were the worst teams, 3 worst teams in the NFL, and the other ones were 3 of the best teams in the NFL, including the best team in the NFL who won the Super Bowl. And again, this isn't the only story in the NFL. There's a guy named Brock Purdy who played for the San Francisco 49ers, plays for the San Francisco 49ers. And when they draft players, which is when they pick the players to be on their teams when they come out of college, there's a person who gets picked last. After all the rounds of the draft are over, there's the last person, the last pick in the last round. And we always pay attention to the first round draft pick because they're going to get paid the most, because apparently they're the best. And again, if you look at the history of first-round draft picks, There's so many terrible ones. It's unbelievable. And there's so many people who were picked lower down because the prediction was they're not going to be as good and not going to be as valuable. And they ended up being tremendously good and tremendously valuable. And so they actually call the last person picked in the NFL draft Mr. Irrelevant. Do you hear the prediction? This person will not matter. They probably won't even make the team. They won't make any money, and they certainly won't make an impact. And so Brock Purdy ends up being Mr. Irrelevant, gets picked by the San Francisco 49ers, and ends up leading his team to the Super Bowl. The only reason probably they didn't even win the Super Bowl is because he got injured in the NFC Championship game and sort of damaged his elbow while throwing the ball and getting hit by somebody. And he ends up being one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL, not just not irrelevant, but Mr. Relevant, the most relevant, right? And let's look at the value here. If you can find good employees or good people in places that everyone else isn't looking, which is the story of Moneyball, but also the story of Brock Purdy, you can be tremendously successful. When you pay people a lot to be very good, you need a huge return on investment because you're making a huge investment. But if you can invest a little and get a lot, that's what everybody's looking for. Once Apple is an incredibly valuable stock, it's not that valuable to invest in it because it's already done its thing. You want to buy low and watch it go up, right? And so that's what I'm encouraging you to do. And that's what the freak factor is. That's what Pink Goldfish is it's a way to find better people in a place that everyone else isn't looking because you change the definition of, and you understand there's different locations where these people come from and that they look different than what everybody thinks they look like. Josh Allen was the MVP in the entire NFL this year. He plays for the Buffalo Bills, but he was so poorly rated out of high school that he ended up going to the University of Wyoming. You didn't know maybe there was a University of Wyoming. Wyoming doesn't even have as many people as some universities have. And you never heard of him at the University of Wyoming. And then he wasn't seen as one of the best ever or somebody who was going to be incredibly valuable. And then he ended up becoming the NFL MVP in 2024. So again, these aren't isolated incidents, and we could even do this statistically and just show you that the averages and the rate at which that these people, again, who are incredibly incentivized to do this well, end up doing this poorly. And so again, what am I saying here? We're bad at predicting who's going to be successful and who's going to be unsuccessful. So we need to be more humble in it. We also need to know that and then slow down and say, so maybe let me give more people a chance and let me give different people a chance. And let me be more hesitant about my predictions to make sure that I'm not causing a self-fulfilling prophecy and actually making people worse than they otherwise could be. And if I'm going to make self-fulfilling prophecies, I'm going to make them in the positive direction. I'm going to assume that people are going to be better and more successful, and then I'm going to invest in them and give them resources and discover hidden strengths where everybody else sees weaknesses. And then I'm going to help these people become more successful than they otherwise might have been. So we've also talked about this in the past. There's another way to think about this, which is Matt Stutzman, who just won the gold medal in Paris in the Paralympics for archery, and Matt Stutzman has no arms. When you look at a person with no arms, and if I showed 1,000 people a picture of someone with no arms and asked them to predict how good he's going to be at archery, they would say he can't even pick up the bow and arrow, much less be good at archery. In fact, there's nobody who could be worse at archery than a person with no arms. They wouldn't have predicted Matt Stutzman's success because they couldn't see the hidden strength that was hiding in what looked like obvious weakness. So as you parent your children, be careful. Remember self-fulfilling prophecy. And be careful that you don't identify characteristics that aren't yours, that aren't your favorite. You're really clean and one of your kids is really messy. You're really quiet and one of your kids is really loud. You're really relaxed and one of your kids is really energetic. You're really cooperative and team-oriented, and one of your kids is really individual and competitive. And what you want to do, because it would support your way of living and your way of doing things, is predict failure for that person. You're never going to succeed if you act like that, right? That's my whole story. That's my whole freak factor story. Dave, if you can't learn to sit still, be quiet, and do what you're told, this is what I heard over and over and over when I was a kid. If you can't learn to sit still, be quiet, and do what you're told, you're never going to be successful. And now I get paid to stand up and talk and run my own business. And not just a little bit. Like I said, I'm leaving on this trip, and sometimes I'm speaking so much I can barely make it from one place to the next. So I'm going to fly to Kansas City and drive to Junction City, Kansas, which is just outside of Manhattan, Kansas. And then I'm speaking at night on a Monday night. And on Tuesday morning, I need to be speaking in Dallas, Texas. And there's no good way to fly there from Junction City, Kansas to Dallas in that time frame. And I don't have a private jet, and I'm not Superman, and I don't have the gift of flight. And so I'm going to drive my rental car 7 hours through the night and get there early in the morning the next day without much sleep to be able to speak, because I get paid to do what people spend their whole life telling me to stop doing. And what they predicted was going to be my undoing, when in fact it's the thing that makes me successful and allows me to pay the bills and feed my family and have the life that I have. And that's another one of my favorite stories that I've just seen again recently pop up and gotten more detail on, about terrible predictions. Somebody sent it to me on Instagram the other day. I knew the story, and I think I've even shared it a little bit. But it's the story of Dave Pilkey, and he was a kid who was always scribbling in school and drawing pictures and drawing cartoons. I'm showing my Instagram illiteracy here, because there's a way that you can bookmark things on Instagram, and so I've bookmarked these things so that I can see them. Little imperfection on the Imperfectionist Podcast, and now I'm unable to find my, there we go, unable to find them. All right, here we go. So anyway, he's a kid, he's at school, he's coloring, he's doodling, he's goofing around, and everybody tells him that's not going to work out for you, and that you're the worst. And as he explains in his, he uses it as his bio on the back of his books. He said, fortunately, Dave wasn't a very good listener. And he went on to create something called Captain Underpants, which is a cartoon series of books for kids, and has sold millions and millions of copies of this book and this comic that the teacher told him was never going to lead him anywhere. And think about that. He said, fortunately, Dave wasn't a good listener. So let's think about that. What if he had been a good listener? That's self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The only reason that didn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy is because a kid had the courage, or maybe even just the inability to do anything other, right? Sometimes I think our strengths and weaknesses are what we can't not do, right? I tried to be quiet. I couldn't. He tried to stop maybe, but he couldn't. Stop writing, stop doodling, stop drawing. It was a compulsion. It was an obsession, right? But look what would have happened, right? But we wouldn't have known. We wouldn't have known that she created a self-fulfilling prophecy and that she destroyed somebody's potential to be an amazing artist and an amazing author, because there's no way to see that in reverse. There's no way to know what might have been about him. And so that's something that I hope would slow us down a little bit more, is the danger of doing that. The fear that what if I'm potentially destroying somebody's potential because I feel compelled to predict their failure, because I think I'm so smart and I think I have so much insight that I can figure out who's going to make it and who isn't going to make it. And I think we should have a healthy fear of doing that poorly. And again, just an acknowledgement that it's very, very difficult to do it well, and most people don't. And so if we're going to make mistakes, I'd encourage you to make mistakes on predicting success, and in being the person who finds strength where everyone else finds weakness. Remember the Doodle Boy story. Joe Whale, who's got a cool new line of clothing that's come out, and that I've seen on Facebook ads and stuff like that. He had a teacher say, you got to stop that. No doodling in school. And then he had another teacher who said, let's set you up with an Instagram account. And now he has a deal with Nike and the Prince and Princess of Wales and Marks and Spencer, which is a huge department store chain over there. And he's done gallery shows. He's a kid who's become an incredibly successful artist, not only with his art, but also financially and with fame and notoriety, because someone predicted, seeing the same thing. Someone predicted success when somebody else predicted failure. Somebody said, keep going and let me help you. And somebody else said, stop that. That's never going to get you anywhere, which again is that prediction of success or prediction of failure. That's never going to get you anywhere. I know what causes success, and this isn't it, right? Do it my way. And if you can't, you're not a good person and you're not going to do it well. So a little bit of a sports lesson, a little bit of March Madness. I hope your brackets are doing well. Mine are not. I'm losing the group that I started with my brother-in-law and my daughter and my wife and my brother and my sister-in-law. I'm probably going to lose because I cheered for the Badgers, but I'm not ashamed. You know, the way I pick is I recognize I'm not a good predictor and that no one is. And so instead of trying to predict who will win, I predict who I want to win. So I picked Florida because my niece goes there. I picked Vanderbilt because my favorite comedian, Nate Bargatze, cheers for them. I picked UNCW, University of North Carolina, Wilmington, because my daughter went there and my other daughter is about to go there. And I don't feel bad about that. I picked University of North Carolina because we live in North Carolina. And I picked Duke up until, I predicted that they would play Wisconsin, and I picked that Wisconsin would win, and Wisconsin never even got close. I picked Marquette because they're from Wisconsin, and I was wrong, right? And so just remember that and think about your own. If you don't want to listen to me, I would ask you to evaluate, right? I asked you at the beginning, how good are you at predicting? Here's another question. Go back and look at how good have you been at predicting, and look at it. Right? When you've had to pick who's going to be good and who's going to be bad as an employee. And here's another example of where the stakes are really high: business partners. The one thing I've learned about business partnerships is probably don't do it, because most business partnerships end up like most marriages, not just end up separating, but really destroying relationships. People who used to be best friends, people whose families used to be best friends with each other, people who used to go on vacations together, and they get in business together, and then it all blows up because we can't be sure how things are going to turn out in the future. And we're predicting that this is the best person in the world to possibly do business with, and then it ends up being an absolute disaster. So just slow down. Be humble about it. And if you're going to make a mistake on the side of predicting success for others instead of failure. And then be the person who invests in that and tries to make that a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I hope your brackets are going well. I hope your team is doing well. I hope your picks are successful and that you win the office pool. But if you do, remember it was probably luck. And you probably, when you look back, realize that you didn't do that for most years. You just happened to have the team you liked be the good team this year. So that's it for this episode of the Imperfectionist Podcast. I'm heading out to Kansas and then Dallas, and I will see you in another week.